do you see a role for folks who would be called climate deniers or climate skeptics in this overarching conversation around climate change?
Yeah, I think there's a spectrum between, for lack of better word, there's no great words.
You're pushing me not to make a bad joke there, Ethan. There definitely is a spectrum in our world, but I digress. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Let's say climate denier, climate doomer, or climate alarmist.
Yep.
And the truth is somewhere in between. Climate change is real. It's human caused. It
sounds about life.
Also, the world is not going to end on Thursday. So a climate denier I think of as someone who denies that climate change is real, and then somewhere a little bit past that is denying that climate change is human caused. Neither of those positions are accurate. We know climate change is human caused. In terms of their role in the conversation, since climate change can be addressed through solutions that, I'll say it again, help the economy, help our health, help justice, help security, help make our lives better, we can advocate for those solutions. By the way, we can also get into some ways that you can deregulate to address climate change.
Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to The Brian Nichols Show.
Well, hey there, folks. Brian Nichols here on another fun-filled episode, yes, of The Brian Nichols Show. I am, as always, your humble host, joining you from our lovely Cardio Miracle Studios here in sunny Eastern Indiana. The Brian Nichols Show is powered by Cardio Miracle, the best heart health supplement in the world. So if you want to lower your resting heart rate, lower that blood pressure while improving your pump at the gym, stick around. We're going to talk more about that later in today's episode. But first, we're going to go ahead and discuss the topic of climate change. Climate change, I know, climate change. What else has been called? Global warming, global cooling. And we've seen the narratives change quite a bit over the past 30, 40, 50 years. And the politicization of climate change itself. But hey, climate change impacts all of us. It doesn't care about your politics. So we're going to discuss that, and I can't do that alone. So joining me today from Young Voices is Ethan Brown. There we go. Ethan, welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. How you doing? I hit the wrong button. My bad, Ethan.
All good. Thanks for having me.
You know, you'd think after almost 1,000 episodes here at the Brian Nichols Show to have my intro down to a science, but alas, technology gets in the way. Ethan, I am so excited for today's conversation. I'm excited to dig into climate change. I was talking to you before we hit the magical record button that I candidly haven't had a conversation around climate change in quite a hot second. So it's a topic that, I am aware of. I've talked quite a bit here on the show, but granted, it was probably a year plus or so since we had somebody on the show talking about this specific issue. So I'm really excited to get into the weeds today. Climate change, global warming, global cooling. We've heard it all. But before we really dig into not just the science, but also, Ethan, the politicization of climate change, let's first do the audience a favor, and that is introduce yours truly, yourself, whatever the terminology is there. Let's introduce Ethan Brown to the Brian Nichols Show audience. So Ethan, who are you? Why do you care so much about climate change? And why are you focused on the depoliticization of climate change for just not just today's conversation, but overarching across the theme here?
Yeah, so I am Ethan Brown. I'm 25 years old. I live in Connecticut, and I currently work as training program coordinator at the University of Rhode Island's Metcalf Institute, which works to connect journalists and climate scientists to have better climate communications with accuracy and accountability and make it more approachable. Prior to that, I was the founder and host of The Sweaty Penguin, which was a award-winning comedy climate podcast presented by PBS's Climate Initiative, where I worked to try to make climate change less overwhelming, less politicized, and more fun. The show, I interviewed over 150 climate scientists. Prior to that, I did a degree in environmental analysis and policy. And to answer your question, I think when I first learned about climate change back in high school, it was really scary, really overwhelming seeing all these doom and gloom headlines, to the point that I didn't find it interesting. It wasn't something I wanted to go learn about. And it really took until going to college, I took some environmental courses and saw there's a lot more nuance to this than I realized. There are a lot more solutions out there, solutions that can actually help the economy as well as the environment, help health, justice, security, make our lives better. And that was when I started to try to take a different approach, where I would show pros and cons of different solutions and try to send stuff to both liberals and conservatives. And I found everyone liked what I was saying. And that was kind of the impetus for the Sweaty Penguin and now my work today.
Good stuff, Ethan. And by the way, let's just kind of, take a step back here, and we'll address why I think there is such a need to have this non-politicized conversation around the idea of climate change, right? Because, and you're right, I go back to when I was in school, we were required in biology class to watch An Inconvenient Truth, read by Al Gore. Okay, whatever. If it feels like I'm being propaganda guys. I was being whatever that word is. It was propaganda. That's what it felt like. And you fast forward to where we are in 2025. I mean, 5 short years ago, Ethan, the world was ending, or so we thought. And you can see how when the expert class, they jump in and they make their edicts, they make their proclamations, and it ended up, I mean, how many of the trust the science narratives that were put forth during COVID ended up being complete hogwash, right? And that right there, I know for a lot of folks who were looking at the climate change narrative, I think that was a moment where a lot of folks said, oh, it's the same thing. Or at least it feels like the same thing. Oh, you don't get your COVID jab. You want your grandma to die. Oh, you don't want to help, reduce your carbon emissions. You want the polar bears to die. You want the penguins to be sweaty, right? That was the vibe. And I think what's happened, Ethan, is that over the past 10, 15 years, as the left, I'm just going to, bucketize the left in this conversation for just generalization's sake, the left has really been the group that has coalesced around this climate change issue, namely from it being some, just world-ending, soon to be happening disaster. We saw folks like AOC leading back with the Green New Deal back in the end of the 2010s. And it got, I think, rightfully excoriated in the public discourse because I think it was goofball in the way that it was trying to present some solutions. And yet it doesn't take away from the fact that our climate does change, right? And I think the main conversation, instead of talking about the politicization of climate change, should really come back to what's our role in terms of impacting the climate? Do we have an impact on the climate, from an anthropogenic climate change perspective? And this is where I think a lot of the dialogue falls apart, not from a finding solution standpoint, which I think you're spot on. We need to talk about solutions. And, good friend, Caleb Franz, who's on the show here, his wife, Danielle, she leads the I forget the name of the organization.
American Conservation Coalition.
Hit it again. What is it?
American Conservation Coalition.
Oh, it is ACC. Okay. In my head, it was ACC, but I knew it stood for something more important. But like that right there is a conservative approach to climate change that is saying, hey, maybe not Green New Deal, but maybe start investing in private solutions or encouraging private entities to start building up some solutions, right? So you do see that it's not just a left-right, red team, blue team dynamic. There is a overarching problem that we can talk about from a solutions-based perspective. But let's just kind of go back to the Green New Deal, the inconvenient truth of climate change, right? Because I would say, Ethan, it is the fact that a lot of folks on the left have taken climate change to be kind of like one of their, one of the flags they carry into battle. That in itself has turned off a lot of folks on the right. But I would say to those folks on the right, that doesn't negate the problem that the folks on the left are pointing out. It might negate some of the solutions they're presenting, because a lot of the solutions are going to be just big inflated government bloat to try and slap a Band-Aid onto a gunshot wound. So let's talk about this today. What is the truth about climate change, specifically where we are today in 2025? And let's talk about some of the solutions you've seen work that are non-politicized, but actually helping move the needle some. You know what doesn't need tariffs, subsidies, or a government bailout to prove it works? Cardio Miracle. So while politicians are out there trying to artificially manipulate markets and slap tariffs on everything from steel to soup cans, your body's not waiting for a policy memo. It's either firing on all cylinders or it's not. And if you're like me, trying to cut through the BS and just getting results, you want something that actually works. And that's why I've been using Cardio Miracle for 2 years now. Because it helps lower blood pressure, it supports healthy nitric oxide levels, and it boosts your performance, whether you're in the gym or just trying to survive, yes, another congressional session.
So don't wait for the FDA or some three-letter organization to approve what your body already knows. Cardio Miracle gets results. If you're tired of your health being another victim of bad policy and even worse science, then scan that little QR code over my shoulder or head to cardiomiracle.com and use code TBNS at checkout to get 15% off your order. One more time, that's cardiomiracle.com. Use code TBNS for 15% off, because your heart doesn't need a tariff to know what's good for it. And now, let's get back to the show.
Yeah, I want to go back to the point you made about kind of the doom and gloom of it all, because it's actually a lot of miscommunications, even beyond some of the stuff you were sharing. Example I had talked about a few years ago on the podcast, and apologies for not remembering every number within this, but the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is basically a group of hundreds of scientists around the world that get together every few years to look at all of the academic literature on climate change and synthesize conclusions. They put out their synthesis report a few years ago, which I think half of the report was on solutions and on a variety of different solutions that, again, like I was saying, don't just help the environment, but help the economy, help all these other things we care about. And it certainly showed climate change is real and here and threat and scary, but also fixable. And it led to a whole bunch of new news stories that said, act now or it's too late. And I think I realized that has just been the pattern that happens over and over, but it's not necessarily what the scientists are saying. I think part of it is that we actually have been addressing climate change. The US's carbon emissions have fallen about 20% since 2005, in large part just because clean technologies have gotten so much cheaper over the last decade. At this point,
market finds a way. How about that?
Exactly. And I think China's emissions peaked last year and are going to start coming down. The EU's have fallen considerably. So we're seeing progress, which is part of where you might say, act now or it's too late. But then we did act a bit, and then you say it again. But again, you see why that messaging is so flawed. And that's where, for folks like yourself, it can start to feel like just the boy who cried wolf.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of...
And really quick, Ethan, I don't mean to interrupt, but it also turns into this outrage Olympics, right? I only have so much bandwidth to be outraged about things. And like, listen, folks, they really will get more outraged towards things that they can actually control. And that goes to the see, touch, smell, taste, hear, like the things in my immediate purview. I'm going to focus on those things versus the weather's changing. Yeah, it changes all the time. Climate change, isn't that what the climate does? It changes. Like, that is the perspective that lots of folks have. And they're like, listen, dude, that's great. The polar bears are having trouble eating more food. Well, guess what? My family's having trouble eating more food because things have gotten so expensive. So, well, you go worry about the polar bears. I'm going to worry about my family, right? And that, I think right there, the outrage Olympics, that's why so many people just turn off from this conversation.
Yeah, and that's the exact insight that I really found in doing the work that I do. People who might be climate deniers on the far right or climate skeptics, and folks who are teenagers scared out of their mind that think the world is going to end on Thursday. I found they have the same fears and anxieties and distrust of the bigger systems that fuel these beliefs. On the one hand, it might be, I don't trust that this problem is real, or I don't trust that there's a solution out there that I can get behind, so it's all going to be government control. On the other hand, it's just fear that my future is going up in smoke. But either way, it comes from a same feeling, and it causes people to disengage. And that's exactly the opposite of what we need. We need people to engage, to find solutions that can work for everybody. I find the more voices that can be in that solutions conversation, the better the solutions will be. So that's why I've tried to approach it with a solutions first approach, a humor approach, an approach that tries to look at what solutions might appeal to both sides of the aisle and what the pros and cons are. And so far, I've found that to be very effective.
So, Ethan, you tossed out a few terms there, and I want to just quickly go back to them and just for the audience's sake, especially better understand what you're referring to when you say climate deniers or climate skeptics. Can you just kind of give a more breakdown in terms of how you classify a climate denier versus a climate skeptic. And I guess the second part of my question is, do you see a role for folks who would be called climate deniers or climate skeptics in this overarching conversation around climate change?
Yeah, I think there's a spectrum between, for lack of better word, there's no great words.
You're pushing me not to make a bad joke there, Ethan. There definitely is a spectrum in our world, but I digress. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Let's say climate denier, climate doomer, or climate alarmist.
Yep.
And the truth is somewhere in between. Climate change is real. It's human caused. It is
Sounds about
here
life.
now. Also, the world is not going to end on Thursday. So a climate denier I think of as someone who denies that climate change is real, and then somewhere a little bit past that is denying that climate change is human caused. Neither of those positions are accurate. We know climate change is human caused. In terms of their role in the conversation, since climate change can be addressed through solutions that, I'll say it again, help the economy, help our health, help justice, help security, help make our lives better, we can advocate for those solutions. By the way, we can also get into some ways that you can deregulate to address climate change. If you advocate for those solutions, it's not a sacrifice. You can advocate for them regardless of whether climate change is real or not. So if someone is truly unwilling to accept the scientific consensus around climate change, they can still advocate for climate solutions. And so that's where I try to get into that conversation.
So Ethan, I don't want to make you my enemy today, but I think I might actually kind of be in that climate skeptic bubble. Not from I don't think that humans have an impact, but rather, I guess in my brain, I am quantifying it based on, yes, humans have an impact, but then the question is how much, right? Mm-hmm. And I go back to when the world was a big, floating molten piece of rock, right? Mm-hmm. Like that was the climate, and that climate changed. And then we had ice ages, and we have, areas that were once lush, beautiful gardens of Eden turning into literal Sahara deserts. So we see that the climate changes without human impact, but it definitely does change with human impact. I think the argument isn't so much that humans aren't causing it. The question is how much. Now that's not to say, well, we should just go and pump out, sludge into our rivers, or, just leave the diesel truck running, idling for days on end. Like that's not it. It's saying we have to be able to walk and chew gum, right? At the same time, saying we are parts of the climate. We are contributors both to the climate changing, but also we are ones taking the benefits of the world that we live in. But that doesn't mean that we live in a bubble, I guess. Like we can't put ourselves almost to the detriment of advancing human progress in the pursuit of trying to stop this thing that has happened for generations, for millennia, I guess is the better way to frame it. It's been happening for millennia, that there's almost like a human arrogance to say we can stop that from happening. So I guess my question comes down to what are tangible things that humans can do today, not to stop the climate from changing? Because I think my position is that it's always going to change, but rather, how do we stop it from changing in very negative, realized ways when it comes to, a very direct act of putting pollution into your water systems, or, like something in that kind of a world. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I'll address the first part a little bit, because you're absolutely correct that climate has changed since the beginning of Earth. And by the way, it's the same scientists who have figured that out who are figuring out the changes in climate today. The reasons for the historical changes that go back millennia, obviously there's a variety. It can be due to changing solar activity, changing volcanic activity. Sometimes an asteroid hit the Earth and it threw a bunch of dust into the air, which caused a snowball Earth because it was reflecting all the sunlight. You have all these different factors that can affect the climate on Earth. Another is the greenhouse effect, which is when you put out gases like carbon dioxide or methane or nitrous oxide, they're structured in such a way where when solar radiation hits it, it wobbles and absorbs that radiation and essentially retains heat and creates kind of a blanket over the Earth. It's the same reason Venus is hotter than Mercury, because it has all these greenhouse gases. So in the last 70 years or so, scientists can look at all these different factors, and we can see solar radiation was actually stable, if not declining in that time. Volcanic activity has been stable in that time. And really, it's that greenhouse effect of these carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases coming out of fossil fuels that are the primary factor in the change that we've seen in those decades. So it is very much quantified. Scientists are asking the same questions that you're asking. And I have a friend who's a paleoclimatologist, which means she goes and drills those ice cores and can look past millennia to see how the atmosphere changed during that time. So it's very interesting. We could probably nerd out about that for a half hour, but
well, how about this? In pursuit of the reducing of politicization of this conversation, I would like to show what I would dare say is one of the most perfect examples of a politicization of this issue. Now, this is going back to when John Kerry was in his role in the I think it was Obama administration, and we have my favorite congressman Thomas Massie grilling him here on Capitol Hill. I just want to play this quick video, Ethan. I want to get your feedback here because I do think that this speaks to one of the main issues where we do have the politicization of the climate change topic. So let's listen to this video. Give me some feedback as we wrap up here. It's like 3 minutes. Just let's go ahead and listen to this really quick.
This is a live reaction. I did not see this ahead of time.
And can you hear this?
Very softly.
It's very soft. Okay, hold on. Let me. This is the magic of editing, folks. Hold tight 1 sec. I'm gonna share this on a different screen. Yeah, StreamYard's fun. Hold tight.
Oh, good.
See, this is the benefit of not Bill O'Reillying it, where we do it live, because I get to do this and I can edit this out. What's even funnier is when I don't edit it out on accident, and then people are like, "Wow, okay, all right, let's try this again." Let me share this screen. Share screen. Include. All right, here we go. All right, so let's go ahead and take a listen here, Ethan.
Great.
Oh, helps if I unmute it.
Secretary Kerry, I want to read part of your statement back to you. Instead of convening a kangaroo court, the president might want to talk with the educated adults he once trusted to fill his top national security positions. It sounds like you're questioning the credentials of the president's advisors currently, but I don't think we should question your credentials today. Isn't it true you have a science degree from Yale? What's that?
Bachelor of Arts degree.
Is it a political science degree?
Yes, political science.
So how do you get a Bachelor of Arts in a science?
Well, it's liberal arts education and degree. It's a bachelor.
Okay, so it's not really science. So I think it's somewhat appropriate that somebody with a pseudoscience degree is here pushing pseudoscience in front of our committee today. I want to ask you.
Are you serious? I mean, this is really serious happening here.
You know what? It is serious. You're calling the president's cabinet a kangaroo court. Is that serious?
I'm not calling his cabinet a kangaroo court. I'm calling this committee that he's putting together a kangaroo committee.
What are you saying, that he doesn't have educated adults there now?
I don't know who it has yet because it's secret.
Well, you said it in your testimony.
Why would he have to have a secret analysis of climate change?
Let me ask you.
Why does the president
let's get back to the science
secret?
of it. Let's get back to the science of it.
But it's not science. You're not quoting science.
Well, you're the science expert. You got the political science degree. Look, let me ask you this. What's the consensus on parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere?
About 406 today.
Okay, 406. Are you aware?
350 being the level that scientists have said is danger.
Okay, are you aware? 350 is dangerous. Wow. Are you aware that since mammals have walked the planet, the average has been over 1,000 parts per million?
Yeah, but we weren't walking the planet. let me just share with you that we now know that definitively at no point during the past 800,000 years has atmospheric CO2 been as high as it is today.
The reason you chose 800,000 years ago is because for 200 million years before that, it was greater than it is today. And I'm going to submit for the record.
Yeah, but there weren't human beings. I mean, there was a different world, folks. We didn't have 7 billion people.
So how did it get to 2,000 parts per million if we humans weren't here?
Because there were all kinds of geologic events happening on Earth which spewed up.
Did geology stop when we got on the planet?
Mr. Chairman, this is just not a serious conversation.
Your testimony is not serious. I agree.
So that's the end of it. But that right there, Ethan, like this kind of goes to, I think, where a lot of the folks in more of the skeptic camp land, because it is so easy to lie with numbers, right? And we saw that with John Kerry here. Now, Thomas Massie is one of my favorite congressmen because he can set things up in such an elegant way, and then just kind of knock somebody over the head with their own argument. And this is where I think a lot of folks end up in my camp saying, okay, I see the issue, but I also see that a lot of folks that are promoting these different solutions, in this case, namely using government solutions, they end up presenting their case in, I'm not going to say a fabricated way, but definitely misleading. Like, oh, that's why you picked the 800,000 year ago mark versus the 2 million years before that, because the data would ruin your argument. And I think this is where so many folks are just like, well, you know what? If you're going to lie about that, or you're going to mislead about that, what else are you misleading about? So I know that was the first time you saw that video, Ethan. What's your feedback to John Kerry and Thomas Massie going back and forth there?
Well, first, I have a bachelor's of science in film and television and a bachelor of arts in environmental analysis and policy. So
I got my bachelor's of arts in political science too. So don't tell Thomas Massie, please.
He'll come after both of us.
Yes.
In terms of that particular conversation, there are other ways that greenhouse gases can and have gotten released into the atmosphere in far bigger numbers than today. Actually, during some of those changes where there is increased solar activity or changes in volcanic activity, you can see carbon respond to it and be released because carbon is stored in our oceans and our forests. And I wish I could explain this better. It's been a little bit since I've explained it, but essentially as the planet warms more, sometimes you can have carbon get released because of that. As the planet cools, you can have carbon get sucked down because of it. It can also happen in reverse. There are scientists that can explain this a lot better than I can. But what I would say to that conversation is, to the science point, it's not that John Kerry's numbers are inaccurate or misleading as much as it's, first off, not the most productive conversation to have in terms of climate change today. And also, obviously, he's not as well versed on the science to answer Thomas Massie's specific scientific questions. A scientist might be better suited for that.
Yeah, Thomas Massie went to MIT, by the way, folks. So that's why Thomas Massie, he's just, his brain, it moves at the speed of a supercomputer compared to us lowly humans.
Yeah. But I would add I've seen the reverse done too. For example, I know there was, not to pick on anyone specific, but I remember seeing Ted Cruz saying that there was no change in climate from, I think, 1998 to 2012 or something. And there was a El Nino in 1998 and a La Nina in 2012, which offset the average temperatures in those specific years, even though the trend line is showing climate change going up. So we can all do that. I hope to just zoom out and acknowledge reality and then discuss solutions, which, like we've been saying, don't have to be solutions from the left or government regulation. They can be.
Ethan, you went right where my brain was already going. So let's talk about that.
Let's do that.
Dig into, like, what are some of these solutions specifically from a private sector standpoint that we can start to make today or start to focus on today that will address the climate change conversation as you outlined.
Yeah, I can talk about some deregulations first that are just kind of fun to nerd out about and also very useful. Permitting reform. Environmental permitting laws have actually gotten in the way of climate solutions often. To build new transmission lines, to do forest management. It can take 4 years for a new forest management project to get approved. And in that time, a wildfire can happen. And as we've seen in California and here in Connecticut and everywhere in the country, we need to manage our forests better. So permitting reform, making it easier to get these projects done, is a deregulation that helps the climate. I don't know if you're familiar with the Jones Act. It's a maritime shipping law that basically restricts, you have to have a US built, flagged, and crewed vessel to be able to go between 2 US ports. On the climate side, first off, it means you can't build offshore wind farms because there are no Jones Act compliant wind vessels to build an offshore wind farm. Today, China has 144 offshore wind farms. The US has like 2 or 3. And if you take away the Jones Act, offshore wind immediately becomes competitive with the cheapest energy sources. What else? Zoning laws. You can build a lot more sustainable cities if you pull back some zoning laws and allow people to live closer to where they work so they don't have to drive their cars as far and that kind of thing. Also makes life more convenient for us and takes away some regulations. And then even regulations around nuclear energy can get in the way. So those are some examples around deregulation. More broadly, though, we've seen the cost of solar come down 85% in the last decade, onshore wind by 55%, batteries for electric vehicles by 85%. I'm not saying any one of them is the answer. They all have their flaws. But if you just let the market do its thing, you will see those technologies start to be competitive and even win out a lot of times. There was a study that found, I believe in 2020, 62% of renewables that came onto the grid were cheaper than the cheapest fossil fuel alternative. So if you kind of step back and let some of that happen and not necessarily pick winners and losers, that will address the issue. There are approaches from the left that in theory could work too, but that's where the debate needs to be had. It shouldn't be, is this real or not, but which approach works better, regulation or deregulation?
There you go, Ethan. I love to hear it because what we found today was what we call common ground, and I appreciate that. So how about this, Ethan? Do us a favor, bring us home. We do our little segment here called Final Thoughts. Wrap up the episode, a nice neat bow for us. Your call to action to the audience, maybe the folks who are, they're still sitting here, they're on the fence, Ethan. Make your final pitch. And to the folks who are saying, Ethan, no, stop being so nice to Brian. He's a climate denier. Roast him. Walk them back from their ledge as well.
Sure. I think that last little bit summed up a lot. I think the only other thing I would add is the more that we can, again, with my work today doing connecting journalists and scientists, the more that we can have those conversations and allow journalists to do a better job getting it right, not relying on these sensationalist headlines that can scare people and politicize people, this conversation gets a hell of a lot better. So that's where I would leave it. If you want to find out more about my work, you can go to thesweatypenguin.com. The podcast itself ended about a year ago, but I'm still doing a lot of web content, and you can find everything else I'm up to there. And then check out Metcalf Institute. We have a lot of really cool stuff. You can just Google Metcalf or believe uri.com/ or uri.edu/Metcalf might get you there. I'll have to
folks who are like, wait, the sweaty penguin, get it? Because it's hot in the Antarctic, folks. That's why it's the sweaty penguin. Come on, stick up with us. No, Ethan, this has been a great conversation. I genuinely believe that there is room for solutions, to your point, that are outside of, government say bad, therefore do good. Like we can walk and chew gum at the same time here, especially when we look at private sector solutions. And it gives us the chance to really figure out the right solutions, right? Instead of saying, to your point, government's going to pick a winner or a loser from a technological standpoint, and this is the way we're going to stop climate change going forward. Okay, until we realize that option ended up causing, even worse climate change unintentionally because we didn't allow it to actually compete in the marketplace, not just of ideas, but the actual marketplace where we buy and sell solutions that make the most sense. So I really appreciate you coming on the show today, outlining that it doesn't have to be this black or white narrative, or just this back and forth debate of climate, climate alarmists to the climate deniers. Like let's be able to find that dirty word, common ground, and actually find some ways to move forward together in a good solutions perspective. So with that being said, Ethan, thank you for joining the show, and thank you for bringing your insights here to the program. And with that being said, folks, if you got some value from today's episode, please go ahead, give it a share when you do tag yours truly at B Nichols Liberty. We can go ahead and continue the conversation on your favorite platforms like X, Facebook, or Instagram. As for the Brian Nichols Show, you can find it on your favorite video platforms like YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, and Facebook. Or if you like to take your shows on the go like I do, head over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, wherever it is you consume your podcasts. Hit that subscribe button, and of course, hit that little notification bell so you don't miss a single time we have a brand new episode go live, which, by the way, every Monday and Friday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern, we have a brand new episode hitting your X feeds as well as Rumble. So make sure you go ahead and check those out over there. Hit that subscribe button. And of course, continue the conversation down below. What are your thoughts? Is climate change man-made? Are we completely out to lunch here? Is Ethan a goofball thinking that the world's going to end from climate change? Just kidding, Ethan. Like that. Those are the questions I want you guys to go ahead and continue the conversation down below. But please, as always, do so respectfully. With that being said, we're going to wrap things up. Brian Nichols signing off here on the Brian Nichols Show for Ethan Brown. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.